The Alpha King almost exposed himself on the first day, not because his disguise failed, because of what he overheard. "You should be embarrassed." The words drifted across the garden with enough volume to ensure everyone heard them, including the servant carrying a silver tea tray. The servant lowered his head, said nothing, exactly as a servant should, which was fortunate, because that servant happened to be Alpha King Kalen Draven, ruler of the largest kingdom on the continent, currently disguised in plain gray clothing, and according to several noblewomen, completely worthless. The afternoon gathering had been organized by House Ashwin, one of the oldest noble families in the kingdom. Beautiful gardens surrounded the estate. Flowers bloomed beneath carefully maintained archways. Young noblewomen gathered around tables covered in expensive pastries and tea. Everything appeared elegant, refined, civilized, until people started revealing who they truly were. Kalen moved quietly between tables, refilling cups, serving refreshments, observing. That was the purpose of the disguise. Observation. People behaved differently around power. They measured their words, polished their personalities, performed versions of themselves they wanted others to see. Servants received no such performance. Servants saw the truth, and the truth often disappointed him. Lady Marissa Thornvale certainly wasn't helping. The daughter of one of the wealthiest families in the kingdom sat at the center of attention. Beautiful, fashionable, admired, the sort of woman many nobles considered an ideal future Luna. Kalen disagreed, strongly, especially now. Marissa looked directly at him, a faint wrinkle appearing on her nose. "You nearly spilled the tea." The accusation wasn't even true. Kalen remained silent. The tray hadn't moved. That didn't matter. The young women surrounding her immediately joined the conversation. "He looks terrified." One laughed. Another smiled. "Most servants do." The group found this amusing. Marissa tilted her head, studying him, like someone examining an object rather than a person. "I suppose fear is all people like him have." Laughter followed, more confident this time, encouraged. The comments continued. His clothes, his status, his appearance, everything became a target. Several noblewomen seemed eager to contribute, as though cruelty became more entertaining when shared. Kalen listened quietly, not offended, not surprised. The test was working, painfully well. People revealed their character most clearly when they believed nobody important was watching. And right now, everyone assumed the servant standing nearby possessed no value whatsoever. Then something unexpected happened. A chair scraped softly against stone. The laughter stopped. Not immediately, gradually, like a storm losing strength, because someone had stood, and apparently that someone intended to speak. That's enough. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The firmness alone captured attention. The garden fell silent. Every head turned, including Kalen's. For the first time that afternoon, he looked directly at Lady Alara Ashwin, the woman he had come here to evaluate. The leading candidate for the position of future Luna. Alara's expression remained calm, composed, yet there was unmistakable disapproval in her eyes. She looked at Marissa, then at the others. What exactly has he done wrong? Nobody answered. The question lingered awkwardly, because suddenly the situation seemed far less amusing. Marissa frowned. "We're only joking." "No." Alara shook her head. "Oh, you're not." Silence spread across the garden, the kind of silence that appears when truth arrives unexpectedly. Then Alara looked toward the servant, toward Kalen, and said something nobody else had bothered considering. "He's working." A pause. "You're humiliating someone for doing his job." The words landed with uncomfortable precision. Several noblewomen looked away, others shifted in their seats. For the first time all afternoon, nobody seemed eager to continue the conversation, and standing there holding a silver tray, the Alpha King found himself unexpectedly curious about Lady Alara Ashwin, because unlike everyone else, she had defended a servant who could offer her absolutely nothing in return. 3 months earlier, the Royal Council had staged an intervention. At least that was what Kalen called it. The council preferred the term discussion. The difference was largely irrelevant. Either way, he spent 2 hours trapped inside a chamber filled with advisors, determined to lecture him about marriage. The kingdom needs stability. That argument appeared first. Predictably. Then came the second. The people want a Luna. Followed immediately by the third. The royal bloodline requires an heir. By the end of the meeting, Kaelin felt less like a king and more like a particularly stubborn breeding project. Unfortunately, the council wasn't entirely wrong. The kingdom did need a Luna, just not any Luna. Over the following weeks, noble families practically flooded the palace with candidates. Portraits arrived daily. Background reports followed. Recommendations appeared from every corner of the realm. Beautiful women, intelligent women, powerful women, politically advantageous women. According to the documents, they were all perfect. Kaelin trusted exactly none of it. Because perfection existed only on paper. Real character revealed itself elsewhere. And after years on the throne, Kaelin had learned something important. Most people behaved differently around power, especially people hoping to marry it. The realization eventually produced an idea, a simple one, dangerous, possibly ridiculous, which usually meant it was worth trying. If everyone performed around a king, then stop being a king, at least temporarily. The plan horrified his advisors. Naturally. You want to do what? Lord Herrick nearly dropped an entire stack of reports. Kaelin remained unimpressed. Observe them. By pretending to be a servant? Yes. The council looked collectively unwell. Several advisors began arguing immediately. Security concerns, political risks, questions about royal dignity. Kaelin ignored most of them, because the idea solved a problem. For the first time, he could observe people without titles influencing their behavior. No royal authority, no political pressure, no advantage attached to kindness, only authenticity. And authenticity was surprisingly rare. 3 candidates underwent the test before Alara Ashwin. The results proved enlightening and disappointing. One noblewoman spent entire afternoons insulting household workers. Another ignored servants so completely she never learned a single name. The third treated ordinary people with courtesy only when influential guests were present. The moment attention disappeared, so did the kindness. Each evaluation ended the same way. Rejected, not publicly, not cruelly, simply removed from consideration. Then came House Ashwin, the final candidate on the list, Lady Alara Ashwin. According to her file, she possessed several unusual flaws, at least by noble standards. She donated excessive amounts of money, volunteered for village projects, spent time with commoners, frequently ignored opportunities to improve her social standing. One report described her as frustratingly unconcerned with status. Kaelin found that particular criticism interesting. 3 days into the assignment, he found it increasingly accurate. The incident in the garden should have been insignificant, a minor interaction, nothing more. Yet, it lingered. Because Alara gained nothing by defending him, nothing at all. She didn't know who he was, didn't expect rewards, didn't anticipate recognition. The servant possessed no influence, no wealth, no power. And still, she intervened. The thought followed him throughout the day, then into the next, and the day after that, until Kaelin reluctantly admitted something unusual. For the first time since creating the test, he wasn't merely observing a candidate. He was genuinely interested in understanding her, and somehow that made the assignment considerably more complicated. According to noble society, Lady Alara Ashwin had several serious problems. At least that was the conclusion Kaelin reached after spending a week listening to people discuss her. The criticisms appeared surprisingly consistent. She spends too much time outside the estate. She donates ridiculous amounts of money. She never takes advantage of opportunities. She's far too involved with village affairs. The complaints continued endlessly. One afternoon, Kaelin listened as Lady Marissa Thornvale delivered an especially passionate assessment. The 2 women stood at opposite ends of the ballroom, Alara speaking with local merchants, Marissa speaking with nobles. The contrast felt symbolic. She behaves more like a caretaker than a noble. Several young women nodded immediately. clearly agreeing. Marissa folded her arms. Honestly, I don't understand why she's even being considered. The group murmured support. Kaylin nearly laughed, because from what he had observed, those exact qualities made Alara the strongest candidate by a considerable margin. Apparently, noble society disagreed. Fortunately, Kaylin trusted evidence more than gossip, and the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. The following morning, he accompanied Alara to a nearby village. Officially, he carried supply crates. Unofficially, he continued observing. The village sat less than an hour from the estate. Small, modest, easy for nobles to overlook. Most did. Alara didn't. The moment she arrived, people greeted her warmly. Not respectfully, warmly. There was a difference. Children ran toward her immediately. Several elderly villagers waved from nearby porches. Shopkeepers smiled when she passed. The reactions appeared natural, unforced, which made them more meaningful. People weren't responding to her title, they were responding to her. At one point, a little girl tripped while carrying a basket. Apples rolled across the road. Before anyone else reacted, Alara knelt to help gather them. No hesitation, no concern for appearances. No awareness that several nobles watching from a distance looked mildly horrified. A future Luna wasn't supposed to pick apples off roads. Apparently, nobody informed Alara. The little girl beamed. Alara smiled back, and somehow the interaction felt more revealing than any formal interview ever could. Later that afternoon, Kaylin witnessed something similar. A local farmer approached with concerns about irrigation systems. Most nobles would have redirected him toward an advisor, or a steward, or literally anyone else. Alara listened, asked questions, took notes, promised to investigate. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes, not because she had to, because she cared. The pattern repeated everywhere. Workers trusted her, children adored her, villagers sought her guidance, and servants smiled whenever she entered a room. The respect wasn't commanded, it wasn't purchased, it wasn't inherited, it was earned. Day after day, interaction after interaction, the realization became increasingly uncomfortable, because Kaylin had started this assignment expecting to evaluate a potential Luna. Instead, he kept discovering qualities he admired. The distinction mattered a great deal. One evening, while returning from another village visit, Alara laughed at something an elderly woman said. The sound carried across the courtyard, warm, genuine, uncomplicated. Kaylin found himself smiling before he could stop it. The reaction startled him. Enough that he immediately looked away, because for the first time since beginning the test, a troubling thought entered his mind. He wasn't looking forward to the results anymore. He was looking forward to seeing her, and that was a complication no royal advisor had warned him about. The friendship began accidentally. At least that was how Kaylin preferred to think about it. The alternative required admitting he was actively seeking opportunities to spend time with Alara, and that felt dangerously close to a problem. The first real conversation happened in the estate kitchen. Kaylin was carrying sacks of flour, or pretending to. The truth was, he could have lifted all of them at once. Years of alpha training made the task almost effortless. Still, appearances mattered, especially when one was disguised as a servant. He had just finished unloading supplies when Alara entered, not with an entourage. Not with servants trailing behind her, alone, which immediately separated her from most nobles he knew. She smiled when she saw him, a simple gesture, yet somehow it caught him off guard. "You're new." Kaylin nearly laughed. 3 weeks inside the estate, and this was apparently their first proper introduction. "Yes, my lady." The title felt strange now, more distant than before. Alara tilted her head slightly. "You don't have to call me that." Kaylin blinked. Most nobles insisted upon titles. Some practically demanded them. Alara looked genuinely uncomfortable hearing one. "Then what should I call you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. A faint smile appeared. "Alara works." The answer felt absurdly informal, and somehow completely natural. Their conversations grew from there. Small exchanges at first, a few minutes in the garden, brief discussions in hallways. Simple observations shared between tasks, nothing significant. Yet Kaylin found himself remembering each one. One afternoon, Alara discovered him reading during a break. The book immediately captured her attention. "You like history?" Kaylin glanced up. Careful. Always careful. Discussing books became dangerous when one accidentally possessed first-hand knowledge of certain historical events. Fortunately, the topic remained harmless. I do. Alara sat beside a nearby fountain, clearly interested. Most people find it boring. Most people are wrong. The response escaped automatically. Alara laughed. The sound startled him. Not because it was unusual, because he realized he liked hearing it. Far more than he should. Over the following days, their conversations expanded. She asked about his family. He invented answers. She asked about his goals. He carefully avoided mentioning the throne. She asked what kind of life he wanted. That question proved unexpectedly difficult, because for several seconds, Kalen forgot he was supposed to be pretending. His real answer nearly escaped. Peace. Honesty. Someone who saw him as a person instead of a position. Fortunately, he recovered quickly. Mostly, the strangest part wasn't the conversations themselves, it was how normal they felt. For years, every interaction carried weight, expectations, politics, responsibilities. People measured every word around him, calculated every response. Nothing was ever simple, nothing was ever honest. With Alara, it was different. She treated him exactly like everyone else. Not because she lacked respect, because she believed respect belonged to everyone. The realization lingered, day after day, until one evening, while walking back to the servant quarters, Kalen confronted an uncomfortable truth. He enjoyed being around Alara, not as a king observing a candidate, not as a ruler conducting a test, as himself. Or at least, the closest version of himself he had shown anyone in years. And standing alone beneath the evening sky, the Alpha King realized something dangerous. For the first time in a very long time, he preferred being the servant. The dinner should have been unbearable. At least that was Kalen's expectation. 30 nobles, 4 influential families, 3 hours of political maneuvering disguised as conversation, and himself standing against a wall pretending to refill wine glasses. Normally, such events tested his patience. Tonight tested something else entirely. Because Alara was there, and somehow that made everything more complicated. The formal dinner took place inside House Ashwin's grand hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated long tables covered in silver and gold. Servants moved quietly between guests. Musicians played softly in the background. Everything appeared elegant. Until the conversation shifted, it began innocently enough. A discussion about trade, then border security, then royal policy. Eventually, someone mentioned the Alpha King, the real Alpha King, not the disguised servant standing less than 10 feet away. Immediately, several nobles exchanged amused looks. Kalen recognized that expression. It usually preceded criticism. He wasn't disappointed. Lord Hawthorne laughed first. I hear His Majesty is impossible to live with. Several guests chuckled. Another noble joined in. They say he barely sleeps. Or smiles. More laughter followed. A third raised his wineglass. Perhaps ruling has made him insufferable. The table erupted with amusement. Kalen continued pouring wine. Expressionless. Experienced. Years on the throne taught him how to tolerate criticism. Most rulers received plenty of it, usually deserved. What interested him wasn't the insults, it was the reactions, specifically Alara's. Several guests turned toward her. The attention felt deliberate, calculated. One noblewoman smiled knowingly. You'll probably meet him eventually. The implication drew additional laughter, because everyone understood. Alara remained one of the leading Luna candidates. Many expected a royal engagement within the year, perhaps sooner. The room waited, clearly anticipating agreement, maybe even a joke. Instead, Alara set down her glass. I think that's unfair. Silence. Immediate. Unexpected. Kalen nearly dropped the wine bottle. Across the table, several nobles blinked, confused. One raised an eyebrow. Unfair? Alara nodded. You've never met him. The noble laughed. Neither have you. That's true. She didn't argue, didn't become defensive, simply acknowledged the fact. Then continued. But neither have most people criticizing him. The room grew quieter. Lord Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably. Apparently facts had entered the conversation, and facts rarely improve gossip. Alara folded her hands calmly. The kingdom has been peaceful for nearly a decade. No one disputed it, because they couldn't. The statement was true. Trade has expanded. Again, true. Border conflicts are down. Also true. The nobles exchanged looks, their amusement fading rapidly. Alara wasn't emotional, wasn't angry, wasn't even particularly passionate. She was simply being reasonable, which somehow proved more effective. Then she delivered the sentence that made Kaelin freeze completely. People are quick to judge leaders while enjoying the stability those leaders created. Silence filled the hall. Deep. Uncomfortable. Absolute. Because there was nothing to say. The facts remained facts, regardless of personal opinions. Several guests suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. Others stared at the table, avoiding eye contact, and standing quietly nearby holding a silver tray. The Alpha King felt something shift, something he hadn't expected. For weeks, he had evaluated Alara, measured her character, observed her choices, analyzed her behavior. Tonight, for the first time, he stopped, because the test no longer felt necessary. The answer stood directly in front of him, and as the conversation awkwardly moved toward another topic, Kaelin realized something both simple and terrifying. He was no longer imagining Alara as a candidate. He was imagining her as his future. The problem with tests was that eventually they ended. The problem with feelings was that they rarely waited for permission. Kaelin discovered both truths at the same time. The morning after the dinner, he woke before dawn. Not unusual. Kings rarely enjoyed peaceful sleep. What was unusual was the reason he couldn't stop thinking. Alara, not the kingdom, not council matters, not border security. Alara. The realization irritated him immediately, because complications were easier to manage when they remained political. Personal complications were far more dangerous, especially for a king. For the next week, Kaelin attempted to regain perspective. He failed. Repeatedly, every observation produced the same result. Alara remained exactly who she appeared to be. Kind when nobody watched, patient when nobody rewarded her, respectful toward people who could do absolutely nothing for her. The consistency itself felt remarkable. Most people possessed good moments. Alara possessed good habits. There was a difference. And Kaelin was beginning to appreciate it far too much. The situation became worse whenever he compared her to previous candidates. The comparison wasn't fair. Unfortunately, his mind kept making it anyway. One candidate memorized charitable speeches while mistreating servants. Another spent weeks discussing duty while avoiding actual responsibility. A third seemed more interested in the crown than the kingdom. Alara never spoke about sacrifice. She simply made sacrifices. Never advertised generosity, simply practiced it. Never demanded respect, yet somehow received it everywhere she went. The contrast felt impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Kaelin found himself watching her from across a courtyard. Children surrounded her. Several village families had arrived seeking assistance with a community project. Alara listened carefully, asked questions, offered solutions, and somehow managed to make every person feel heard. The sight produced an unfamiliar sensation. Pride, which made absolutely no sense. She wasn't his Luna, wasn't his responsibility, wasn't even aware of who he truly was, yet watching her succeed made him irrationally pleased. The realization forced him to confront something he had been avoiding. The test had changed. Or perhaps he had. Because somewhere along the way, evaluation became admiration. Admiration became attachment. And attachment was rapidly becoming something else, something far more difficult to ignore. The timing couldn't have been worse. 2 days later, a royal messenger arrived. The sight of the palace seal immediately attracted attention, including Alara's. The messenger bowed respectfully, then delivered a sealed letter. Kaelin already knew its contents. He recognized the handwriting, Lord Herrick, his chief advisor. Which meant the council had finally lost patience. That evening, Kaelin opened the message alone. The contents were brief, direct, predictable. The council requires your decision. The candidate evaluations must conclude. The royal reception has been scheduled. No room for delay, no opportunity for extension. The test was over. For several minutes, Kaelin stared at the letter, thinking, remembering, accepting, because deep down, he already knew the outcome. He knew it before the garden, before the dinner, perhaps even before arriving at House Ashwin. The disguise helped him discover the truth. It didn't create it. Slowly, Kaelin folded the letter, then looked out across the estate grounds. Somewhere beyond the window, Alara continued her evening completely unaware of what was coming. The revelation, the ballroom, the truth, everything. For the first time since becoming king, Kaelin found himself nervous. Not about ruling, not about politics, about one woman, and 7 days later, the entire kingdom would learn why. The royal reception attracted nearly every influential family in the kingdom. Nobles arrived from distant territories. Pack leaders traveled for days. Council members filled the grand ballroom. Everyone understood the importance of the event. What nobody understood was why. Rumors spread endlessly. A political announcement, a royal engagement, a new alliance. The theories changed hourly. None came close to the truth. Alara attended with modest expectations. Another formal gathering, another evening of diplomacy and conversation. Nothing more. At least that was what she told herself. The real problem was elsewhere. A servant, or more specifically, the sudden disappearance of one. For an entire week she hadn't seen him. No conversations in the garden, no unexpected discussions in the kitchen. No quiet observations beside the fountain. Nothing. The absence bothered her more than she wanted to admit, which felt ridiculous, because she barely knew him. At least she thought she did. The ballroom glittered beneath hundreds of crystal lights. Music drifted through the air. Guests filled every corner of the hall. Yet despite the crowd, Alara found herself searching, looking for familiar gray clothing, dark hair, a calm expression, anything. She found none of it. Then the music stopped. Immediately, the room fell silent. Every conversation died. The royal herald stepped forward. His voice echoed across the ballroom. His Majesty, Alpha King Kaelin Draven. Everyone bowed, instantly, automatically. Alara lowered her head with the rest. The great doors opened. Footsteps echoed across polished marble. Slow, measured, confident. The footsteps continued approaching. Closer, closer, then stopped. Directly in front of her. Confused, Alara looked up and forgot how to breathe. For a moment the world simply stopped, because standing before her wasn't a stranger, wasn't a king she had never met, wasn't some distant ruler she only heard about. It was him, the servant, the man from the kitchen, the garden, the fountain, the man she spent weeks talking to. Only now he wore royal black instead of servant gray. A crown rested upon his head. The entire kingdom bowed before him. And suddenly, every conversation they ever shared rearranged itself inside her mind. The confidence, the intelligence, the way he observed people, the careful answers, the questions he asked. All of it made sense now. Too much sense. A shocked gasp escaped somewhere behind her. Then another, then 10 more. The ballroom erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Several nobles visibly paled. One elderly lord nearly dropped his wineglass. Across the room, Lady Marissa Thornvale looked moments away from fainting. The realization had reached everyone at once. The servant, the invisible worker, the man they mocked, the man they ignored, the man they insulted, was the Alpha King. Silence vanished beneath waves of disbelief. Yet Kaelin ignored all of it. The whispers, the panic, the chaos. His attention remained fixed on one person, Alara. For several long seconds, neither spoke, because what exactly could be said? Finally, Kaelin smiled. The same small smile she remembered from countless conversations. Only now it belonged to a king. And then, before the entire kingdom, he took a step toward her. The ballroom held its breath. Hundreds of nobles stood frozen beneath glittering chandeliers. No one spoke. No one moved, because everyone sensed they were witnessing something important. Something that would be remembered long after the evening ended. Kaelin stopped directly in front of Alara. The distance between them felt strangely familiar and completely different. For weeks they had spoken as equals, a servant and a noblewoman, or so she believed. Now the truth stood between them. A crown, a throne, an entire kingdom. Alara stared at him, still trying to reconcile two versions of the same man. The servant who discussed books beside a fountain, the Alpha King standing before the realm. Somehow both were real. That realization proved surprisingly unsettling. Around them, whispers continued spreading through the crowd. Kaelin ignored them. Instead, he looked toward the assembled nobles. His expression remained calm. Yet there was unmistakable authority in his voice when he spoke. Many people believe character reveals itself during moments of power. The room fell silent again, every eye fixed upon him, every ear listening carefully. Kalen slowly surveyed the ballroom, taking his time, allowing the tension to build. Then he shook his head. "I disagree." The simple statement immediately captured attention. Several council members exchanged curious looks. Kalen continued. "Power is easy." A few nobles frowned, clearly uncertain where this speech was heading. The Alpha King didn't care. Titles command respect. His gaze moved across the crowd. Status creates opportunities. Another pause. Authority changes how people behave. The truth settled heavily across the room because everyone understood it, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Then Kalen's voice softened slightly. Character reveals itself when there is no advantage to being kind. Silence. Absolute silence. Across the ballroom, several faces visibly paled, particularly those who remembered insulting a servant. Marissa Thornvale looked as though she wanted the floor to open beneath her. Kalen noticed, so did everyone else. Yet he never spoke her name. He didn't need to. The lesson was already obvious. The Alpha King's gaze eventually returned to Alara, and for the first time all evening, a faint smile appeared. "You defended a servant." The words echoed through the ballroom. Simple, direct, unforgettable. Alara felt hundreds of eyes shift toward her. She resisted the urge to disappear. Kalen continued. "You treated him with dignity." Another pause. "You listened to him." The room remained utterly still. Then came the sentence nobody would forget. "You defended a king without knowing it." A collective gasp spread through the crowd. Even those who already understood the truth seemed affected hearing it spoken aloud, because suddenly the test became clear, the disguise, the observations. The weeks spent living among them, everything connected. Kalen had never been searching for the most powerful noblewoman, or the wealthiest, or the most politically useful. He had been searching for something far rarer, a person whose kindness existed independently of reward. The realization left many guests deeply uncomfortable, especially those who failed. Kalen looked toward the gathered nobles one final time, then spoke the truth they all needed to hear. Some people were kind to a king. Silence. His eyes hardened slightly. Ilara was kind to a servant. The distinction landed like a hammer, because everyone immediately understood which one mattered more. And standing in the center of the grand ballroom, beneath the gaze of an entire kingdom, Kalen prepared to ask the question whose answer he had already known for weeks. The ballroom remained completely silent. No one dared speak. No one dared interrupt, because every person present understood they had reached the moment everything had been building toward. Kalen stood before Alara, the Alpha King, the servant, the same man, and for the first time since the revelation, neither disguise nor title stood between them. Only truth. For several seconds, he simply looked at her, not as a candidate, not as a political solution, not as a future alliance. As a woman he had come to admire long before she knew who he really was. The realization still felt remarkable. After years of council meetings, political negotiations, and carefully calculated introductions, the person who impressed him most had done so without trying, without performing, without knowing she was being watched. Perhaps that was why it mattered. Finally, Kalen spoke. His voice carried easily across the grand hall. 3 months ago, the Royal Council asked me to choose a future Luna. Several nobles nodded. Everyone knew that part. What they hadn't known was how seriously he had taken the decision. Kalen continued. They presented me with names. A pause. Titles. Another. Family histories. His gaze swept across the room. Political advantages. The crowd listened carefully, because many of them had spent months trying to prove their worth through those exact things. Then Kalen smiled slightly. And none of it told me what I actually needed to know. The statement settled heavily across the ballroom, because it challenged everything noble society valued. Wealth, influence, connections, status, all suddenly seemed less important. Kalen turned toward Alara. The atmosphere shifted immediately. More personal now, more honest. You treated people with respect when there was no audience. Alara felt her heart begin racing. The entire kingdom was watching, yet somehow the room felt smaller, Quieter, as though only the two of them existed, Kaelin continued. You listened when others dismissed. A faint smile appeared. You helped when others ignored. The memory of countless small moments flashed through her mind. Village visits, conversations with servants, simple acts she never considered remarkable. Yet apparently someone had been paying attention. Kaelin took another step forward, then another, until only a short distance remained between them. And finally, he asked the question everyone already expected, not because they knew the words, because they knew the answer. Lady Alara Ashwin. Silence filled the room, warm, hopeful, anticipatory. Will you become my Luna? For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then another. The ballroom seemed suspended in time. Ilara stared at him, at the king who disguised himself as a servant, at the man who sat beside fountains discussing books, at the ruler she defended without ever meeting. Or perhaps she had met him all along. A soft laugh escaped her, not from amusement, from disbelief, because life had a strange sense of humor. Then she smiled, the same smile that first caught his attention in the gardens, the same smile he found himself searching for every day afterward, and she nodded. Yes. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Cheers followed immediately. Relief, excitement, celebration. The kingdom had found its Luna. Yet years later, when people retold the story, they rarely focused on the proposal, or the disguise, or even the revelation. Instead, they remembered something much simpler: a servant carrying a tray, a group of nobles laughing, and one woman willing to say, "That's enough." Because the future Luna passed the test long before she knew there was one. Not because she impressed a king, but because she treated an ordinary person with dignity, and in doing so, she revealed exactly the kind of queen she would become. The Alpha King arrived searching for a future Luna. Instead, he found something much rarer, a woman whose kindness did not depend on who was watching. And that was the moment he knew the kingdom had already found its queen.